Hello, and welcome back to the Full Circle Healing Podcast, where we merge modern, cutting-edge science with traditional healing wisdom and everything in between to help you come full circle, back to your original, natural state of health and well-being. I'm your host, Michael, and over the past 15 years, I've helped hundreds of thousands of people find the information, practices, tools, resources, and experts they needed to find their way back to optimal health. Our guest in this episode is my good friend, Dr. Stephanie Davis. Dr. Davis has been in the health world for over 25 years as a microbiologist, functional medicine doctor, research consultant, and trauma healer. Her own journey guided her experience and desire for vibrant health after realizing that there was a missing piece in overcoming her own autoimmune issues and those of her patients, the emotional and traumatic piece. In her practice, she uses various methods including breathwork, neuroplasticity, HeartMath, and holographic manipulation therapy. Being trained and certified in many modalities, she can truly address the triad of mind, body, and spirit. In this very personal episode, you'll learn how and why Dr. Davis has transitioned her practice away from functional medicine and towards emotional and trauma healing. You'll learn the often overlooked role of childhood experiences in shaping lifelong patterns of health and illness, how chronic conditions like autoimmunity and pain conditions correlate with emotional suppression and misalignment, and why major transitions in life like career, job, relationship, moving, loss often bring up unprocessed emotions that may seem unrelated, and how she has navigated this herself, which has fed into her understanding on how to help clients with this same situation. This is a really personal episode for both of us, with a lot of sharing about our own journey and heavy emotions, trauma healing, growing in ways we may not have understood at the time, and how it was navigated. If you're interested in some of the practices described in this episode, head over and grab my ebook called Breathing for Nervous System Regulation at rebelhealth.co/breathing, and you can get started today. Now let's get into it. Hey, Stephanie, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun conversation. And I should say, I know you so well. Dr. Stephanie,
Either
welcome
way.
to the podcast. You have more random credentials and resume experience than any person I think I've ever talked. I knew you for a while before I even knew half the stuff that you do.
I know.
And then the list is long, and the one I just read in the intro is probably less than half of what it could be. Mm-hmm. Because you're changing trajectories. So I think there's a lot of stuff that was left off. Your bio that they just heard is not your full bio. It's your bio for what you're doing right now. And before we get to that, I just want to mention that you did 25 years as microbiologist, which I just found out, functional medicine doctor, research consultant, and now you're working on the trauma side of things, and you've helped formulate professional supplements. You've helped educate practitioners on the use of said supplements for various companies, and I'm sure like a dozen other things. So you've been kind of involved in some way in almost every way that you could be in functional medicine, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's been a circuitous journey, but I'm where I need to be right now.
Yeah, I'm curious about that because we have really similar trajectories, and although our functional medicine, like what we did in that field or are doing, are quite different, but it's the going from I was fitness to nutrition to functional medicine, and now to trauma and emotional healing and nervous system and those kind of things. And it's like, to me, it's the same rabbit hole. It just is the further layers of it. Has been like my experience of like, I started with fitness. That's like, to me, the most superficial layer. I don't mean that in an insulting way to any fitness professionals out there, and movement and exercise are super important and awesome. So please don't think I'm throwing it under the bus, but like it goes fitness, nutrition, what you eat. And then there's the functional medicine side of things with the testing and the protocols, the supplements, the therapies, the treatments. And for a long time, you probably did too. I thought that was the bottom of the rabbit hole, right?
Yeah, for sure. I did too. Same.
Like you can figure anything out from here.
Yeah. And then you realize you can't.
Yeah, and then you
Yeah.
realize you can't. And then there's the
Yeah.
people who I'm sure some are listening to this who have seen the doctors, done the supplements, done the protocols, done the therapies, done the treatments. It almost always moves the needle in some regard for
Mhm.
some. And some people, that's it. They
Yeah.
flip switch, they feel great, symptoms gone,
Yeah.
hallelujah. Others, it kind of moves the needle a little bit,
Yes.
and then they regress or they go and it's forward, backward, forward, backward. But like, how long has it been since you started to realize that there was more to go from where you thought was the bottom? And like, how did you personally figure that out?
I would say probably 12 or 13 years ago. That's when I started this side of the journey for myself. And I had seen in my practice where the people who did the inner work were the ones who were getting like amazing results. So they weren't just like healing and hitting like 70% or like, I feel good. They were the ones who were like feeling amazing and had vibrant health and everything seemed to be flowing their way. And I was like, there's something to this. And it just happened to coincide with me hitting some, like personal like lows. Like I was having some, the inner child struggles, right? I was having that. And one day I woke up and I realized that, no one's going to fix this problem for me but me. Like I have to do the work and I can't blame anyone else. I have to do it myself. So that kind of was the domino that set this all into motion. And the more I dove into the nervous system, the trauma, the emotions, and everything else, the energy, all of it, the more I saw dramatic, changes in healing for myself. But I also, when I started integrating it into my practice, saw those changes for my patients too.
Thanks for sharing. I can definitely relate. And when I got into doing what I'll call deeper healing work, I
Mhm.
was out of necessity. Like I was really depressed and struggling to even get by in life that way. And lifelong, I realized I had anxiety at 30 something for the first time. I didn't know that wasn't normal how I felt all the time.
Yeah,
And so I got interested in it for myself. I had no intention of turning it into my work. Like
me
that
either.
was not on
Right.
purpose. And
Yeah.
then I've completed a number of pretty, I don't know, big trainings. And the first one I went to was purely
Mhm.
to like learn the stuff to like have
Yeah.
for myself, like for my
Same.
own healing, for my own needs. And then I was like, man, this is really cool and this is really fun. And it's really amazing to watch like what can happen in this type of work in these spaces. And
Mhm.
I think I'm going to do this. And it's been a struggle, right? Like, I think I kind of want to, I don't, we'll get into it a little, like that
Yeah.
transition, like how difficult is that? Because we're both kind of going through it right now of trying
Yeah.
to transition how
Mhm.
we show up professionally
Yeah.
and from more the functional medicine side. You're kind of more, you work with patients, but you also do a lot of behind the scenes stuff and research
Mhm.
and education, where I'm
Yeah.
primarily like forward facing education and that kind of stuff. But we're both trying to like transition over. And I think a lot of people listening might not be able to relate to transitioning careers from functional medicine to like deep healing
Mhm.
work, but like making transitions from something that doesn't feel in alignment to them, whether it's
Yeah.
work or a relationship or a living situation or insert part of your life that causes stress that can be changed,
Mhm.
into something that is like, man, I wish I could do that, or I would love to do that, or someday I'm going to
Yeah.
do that, or oh, well, it's scary, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's really interesting because the more I think you can probably relate to this, the more you do the inner work and you change your identity, it's like your body almost rejects those things, that the past version of you. And so to feel aligned and to honor yourself, you almost have to change and go with it. It's like I tell my patients have related to this, the ones who've done the inner work for a long time, they'll like walk into their closet and like, these clothes don't work for me anymore, or the way that their house is set up, or the people that they surround themselves with. It's the same thing. And so for you and I think we feel so strongly about, our purpose and what we're doing and the work that it's like, I told you at the beginning before we hopped on, it's like at March 31st of this year, I'm not taking on any more functional medicine patients. I will keep the ones I have in my practice, but the only new people coming into my practice will be the people who want to do, self-growth, self-discovery, trauma work, emotional work, because, that's what's resonating with me. And it took kind of the end of last year. Like 2024 was a crazy year, I think, for so many people, but I had some great highs, but some really low lows. And I think those lows allowed me to shed all of the stuff I needed to shed in order to step into this version of myself fully and honor it and be okay with it. Because I think, like you had mentioned, I've done so many things in the functional medicine industry, and that's largely what I'm known for. And I think in the back of my mind, I was like, are people going to judge me for this? Or what are people going to think? And then one morning I just woke up and I was just like, screw it. I don't care. I don't care what other people think. I'm doing this for me, and I'm doing this for the people that I serve.
Thank you. Yeah, I can definitely relate. Can you talk a little bit more? It was one of the first things you said in that share was that when things are out of alignment, you're going to feel it. And I think that, like, before we got on, I told you that, like, my hair is falling out, literally. And I see this a lot in people with autoimmune conditions, especially like pain-related autoimmune conditions.
Yeah.
And it's part of the reason I got into this work is because my wife has multiple autoimmune conditions that were very pain-focused, like her flares were pain. And so I dove into that side of it. And there's pretty strong both research evidence and anecdotal evidence that keeping quiet when you don't want to, or don't feel like you should, or saying yes to things that you don't want to be doing, or some other form of silencing yourself or resentment. Gabor Mate is one of the teachers I've studied under, in his book, When the Body Says No, was one of the first things I ever read, like correlating this stuff. And it was, I don't know, the book's probably 20, 25 years old now. And at the time when it came out, everyone's like, oh, that guy's a quack. And now he's like the keynote speaker at all the things. Can you talk a little bit more of that? And like, when you say it'll show up in your body if something's out of alignment, or like I used to hear people say that when I started doing this kind of work, and I still didn't, and then I would repeat it. But I didn't like get it. Like I didn't, and now I know exactly what happens when I'm doing something I don't want to be doing, or something doesn't feel right, or I have to do something that I would rather like, that have to, or the feeling forced, or and each one of those instances has a different, for me, like like sensation. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
And so to kind of dial back and start back where it all begins, it's like so much of it begins in childhood, right? So 0 to 6 years old, when your personality is developing and you're like an absorptive little sponge. And for the first, 2-3 years of that, you don't have the ability to speak. You're not verbal. So you're taking in so much more, and you're not even able to express yourself in many ways, right? And you're learning a language, and there's like that whole component. But that's where the seeds of so much of this, come in, where those seeds of, I'm not worthy of whatever. I'm not worthy of love. I'm not worthy of, abundance. A lot of these, or I'm not good enough. There's so many of these little, seeds that are planted then. And then as we become adults, like older children and then adults, that just keeps on snowballing in and of itself. And I know I can speak from my own personal experience, and it's a lot of my patients it's a similar experience. It's like, those of us who are either millennials or Gen X's, we kind of grew up in that realm of, kids are to be seen and not heard. And so often we were automatically silenced, right? So you start off in that realm of not being able to express yourself. And then that becomes just part of your life and part of who you are. And you had mentioned autoimmunity, and that's a huge place where it shows up. In my practice on the, autoimmune side, I see more Hashimoto's than I see anything else. And it's like, we tie it back to, your voice, not being able to like speak your voice and speak your truth. And I can absolutely relate to that, because for a long time, I actually had antibodies. And then when I started doing this work, and then finally, got to the place where I can speak my voice freely, that they went away. So it's really, really interesting how that happens. But yes, like when you start to tune into your body, when something does not feel right, you feel it. And like you said, different scenarios and different situations, it will show up in different places, and it can manifest as different feelings too. Like for a lot of us, like you'll get a feeling in the pit of your stomach, or you'll feel something in your chest. But as you go further down this rabbit hole, so to speak, you'll feel like little pings. Like I'll get a ping like right above my eye or in the back of my head, or little things that show up for different situations. And I know that if I don't honor that, it will show up, in some way, whether it shows up as a cold or, getting sick or something else in that realm. But I know that if I don't honor it or clear it, sometimes there are situations where you have to decide mentally, is it worth it to say something right now and start an issue? Or, because the person who may have said that to you might not be ready to receive what you have to say. And so you have to like think about that, do I say something? Do I wait to say something? Do I just clear this out myself? So that was one thing that I had to wrap my brain around. It was like learning how to navigate that specific situation of honoring yourself, right? Because, it's one thing to, feel like you're not in alignment with your job, but it's another thing to, with the people in your household or the people who you work with, or, that type of thing where, like I said, somebody might be in a very volatile mood and they might say something that they don't mean. And then it's like, do you go back on that, or do you sit with it? Do you choose to diffuse it within yourself if you have the tools to do that? So it's like learning how to do that, because for me, when I first entered this, I thought it was kind of like an all or nothing. And then you quickly realize you can't do life that way. So it's learning how to navigate this process too.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of nuance that people might miss when they see these like memes
Yes.
of
Yes.
like speak your truth or burn bridges or whatever. Like,
yeah.
yes, and like it always
and
how it's done, and it always has consequences. And but then there's always Gabor always says that you have to make a decision a lot of the time between authenticity and attachment. Like, are you going to be real to yourself, or are you going to maintain a relationship with somebody? And like, both of those carry pain with them in some way. Either you're not being authentic to maintain connection or safety in some situation, which causes you pain, or you are being authentic, which risks that safety, which risks that connection, which also can cause pain. And then it's about like increasing the capacity of the individual to be able to be with whatever discomfort it is that comes along with that choice. But to tie this into, health issues, I don't know how your practice works. So you said you're not bringing on just purely functional medicine clients anymore, but I'm guessing you've done some of the emotional and energetic and trauma side of things with functional medicine patients. And I know the answer to this is everyone, but who's like prime candidates? Like when you're looking through, somebody's history and intakes and symptoms and stories, and you're talking to this person and getting to understand them, who are the people where you're like, oh, this is definitely going to be at the top of the list of what we're going to approach?
Oh, that's funny. Because you're right. It is everyone. But I feel like it's to varying degrees, right? A lot of it is the nuance of understanding where that patient is. Because like, for example, I have somebody new to my practice, and she is polyautoimmune. So right there, polyautoimmunity, having more than one autoimmune diagnosis. She has tons of back pain. You and I know that back pain is related to certain emotional traits, right? Like, or trauma history. She has like a laundry list, and she's tried everything under the sun, but she's also on 10 medications. So it's like, and she has a really hard time focusing, and she's got brain fog because of all of this. And so it's like, yes, do I think this person needs to do the trauma work? But I literally had this conversation with her yesterday. She and I both know it's high on the list, but we need to get to a place where it's doable, where she can sit there and focus long enough to be able to do the inner work, right? So it's like, it's really understanding where the person is and like what we can do right now. And so what I will say is at the top of the list, anything mood related, anxiety, depression. I will give the caveat of there are some like psychoses that those are not really the people who are coming to see me anyways, but those are things that are kind of a different realm. And there are things that can be done, but those are people who I would refer out. Anyone who's got any kind of chronic issue or especially autoimmunity, those are the people, just because, we know our friend, Dr. Keisha Ewer, she wrote, Solving the Autoimmune Puzzle, and the piece that was missing was that trauma component. And that when you start addressing the trauma, and I've seen this in my practice between the people who do like the emotional and trauma work and the people who don't, there's a significant, those are the people who get well. And the people who just choose to sit there and, stay on the supplements and doing the protocols, those, they typically wax and wane. They typically don't get fully better because they have not addressed, the true root cause.
That's a good, I think people can kind of self-identify with that description a little bit. And when I've breached the topic with people, they know. Like,
yes,
they may not want to jump into it, but they know, like, if I bring that up, there's always or asking, like, when did these things start? When did this start? When did you start to have these symptoms? And you can almost always trace it back. Like, I learned this from a client that I had before I knew any of this stuff. She came to me, had all these chronic health problems, and I created this really elaborate, extensive, ridiculously detailed, way too many things in it protocol for her. And then 2 weeks later, we did a check-in call. I say, hey, how's it going? She just starts crying. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what to do. How's it going? Are you doing the thing? I'm not doing any of the things. And my first thought was like, man, these people are so lazy. Like, I spend so many hours coming up with these protocols and then they don't do them. And if they would just do them, they would get better. But why don't they do it? And so I'm just talking to her. And she said, I had a really hard couple weeks. It was the 1-year anniversary of when my son was killed in a car accident. And then I was like, oh shit, I really don't know what to say now. Like, I am in way outside of my scope here. And I'm like, sorry that. And then she told me this story about how that had happened. And I think she had like, wasn't able to give him a ride to go to the place he was going, and like had all this like, it was really hard to listen to. We spent the whole hour where I just listened to her talking about this, and then she started telling me about her son, and I was listening and not saying a lot because I was frozen. Like, I didn't know what to do, but in retrospect, I was doing the thing that I was supposed to do. I just didn't know it. And then I asked her, I said, when did this all start? Like, when did you start feeling like this? And she's like, right after that. And I'm like, huh. So I recommended to her the little that I knew of like people who did that kind of work, or books, or like things, or website. I don't even remember what I gave her. I gave her this new list of stuff that wasn't the other stuff. Yeah. And then I was like, man, I can't help that lady. That sucks. And then I gave her that new list. And a month later we talked. She had started doing her things that I gave her. Yeah. She looked up that stuff. She'd met with 2 of the people. She read a book already. She started doing like daily like practices of some kind, and she had lost like 10 pounds in a month. Part of her thing was she had gained like 80 pounds in a year. She was using food for her grief. It was somebody on grief she was working with and whatever, but the details of what she was doing are irrelevant. It was just like she was night and day a month later. And it's because we accidentally, I played a small part in accidentally uncovering that the root of why she was having so much trouble in the first place was this. And then I pointed her towards things, and then she did the things, and she still checks in with me every once in a while to tell me that and this was 7-8 years ago, that she's doing better and that she's doing so good, and thank you so much, and and now every year, like on her son's birthday is like a celebration and a thing and all this stuff. But I had no idea. I would handle that much smoother now if that were to happen. Like now I intentionally want to see people that are in that situation. But then I was like, don't know what supplements to give you. But it was just like this switch flipped, right? And I'm sure you've seen something. I know that was long, sorry, but I'm sure that you've seen something like that.
You said something really important there too, the grief. A little while ago, I said that 2024 was really hard. And for me, I like to say that I had almost like two ego deaths. And it was interesting because I actually recorded one of my podcasts a couple days ago, and it was walking people through what the healing process and doing this work actually looks like. Because I think we all have this idea that, like you do the healing and then it's done. It's not. It's like it's an ever evolving process. It's like we're humans, we're on this
And it
human
sucks
journey.
when you find that out.
Yep. Yes. And then, so that's what I thought, because I know, like I've had in between my two kiddos, I have a 7-year-old and an almost 12-year-old. I had 2 miscarriages, and they were extraordinarily traumatic for me. Honestly, the hardest things I've ever have gone through in my life. The second one was worse because it was second trimester, and it's literally like having a baby and then not having a baby at the end of it, so that just sucked. And I used to not be able to talk about it without crying. It was like literally, I told people, it was like, I felt like I was sitting at the bottom of 100-foot well, and it was all just black, and there was a little tiny light shining at the top. That was all that I had at that time. And I did so much work because my youngest is 7.5. So that was like 7 to 8.5 years ago. And so I have done a ton of work surrounding that. And it was funny because I would go
That's
out
probably
in public.
around when we met.
Yes, it was. So interestingly that you mentioned that, because I was just thinking of like Keisha and Anna Quebeca, who were all
We were
in
in
that
Boulder.
group. Yes. So we were at one of like a year later, an IFM conference, and I saw them both, and we were talking about it, and I just started crying. I couldn't hold it together. I still at that point couldn't hold it together, even though I had the baby and, my daughter, and I was still, I would say physically whole. I was not emotionally whole. And so it was fascinating because then I did more and more work, and I got to the place where I could talk about it freely and it was okay. And I was like, oh, okay. So I'm good. So,
now.
yes, no, I was not. So last February, there was a lot of death in my life. And it wasn't like, you go on social media and you're like, oh, so-and-so died. It was like people who I knew. It was like close friends, their parents. It was in my personal community, a child who went to my kid's school died in a snowboarding accident. And then one of my, in the trauma world, one of my mentors, one of the kind of teachers in the school, his daughter passed away at 14 years old. And so that hit me really, really hard for multiple reasons. Like,
Yeah, you have kids that age.
I've got kids that age, right?
Yeah.
So you can totally relate. And you can't, like, as a parent, fathom what those other parents are going through. Like, it is horrible. So there was that. But so I cried like almost every single day, multiple times a day for about 2 months. And I'm like, what is going on? I'm like, clearly I didn't process all of the grief, for my own loss. But then I realized there was a generational trauma component. And it took me going through all of that every single day, because in my own family, there is a lot of child loss. Like there's like amongst my own generation. So like myself and my cousins and my mom and her sisters and my grandmothers, there was lots of miscarriages. My mom actually had a baby before me that passed away at 18 days old. Like, so there was a lot of child loss. And I realized that not only did I have to process that for myself, but then I also needed to work the intergenerational trauma piece of it too. But then, okay, did that, and I'm moving along and
Definitely healed.
Yeah. Oh yeah. May comes along, and again, boom, the whole, like, it starts again. And it's like the crying and the breakdown, like total utter breakdown, like knowing I need to do a ton of work in a day, and I couldn't. Like, I just had to sit there and cry. I had to sit there and let it all out. And then I did all the work that I could do for myself. And I also reached out to some of my friends in this realm, because I know when I need somebody else now I know when I need somebody else to hold the space for me and me not hold the space for myself. And so.
And you're able to let them do it. That's a whole nother thing. Knowing like, oh, I should probably. I had a session yesterday with one of the teachers from Compassionate Inquiry, which is Gabor's training, because I need support right now. And so I reached out to him, and he like gave me this big, I don't want to use the word lecture because it has a negative connotation, but like at the start of the session, he spent 10 minutes praising me for even making the decision with as much as I have going on in my life right now
Yeah.
to be there doing
Yeah.
that, and that needs to be reinformed, because we learn, right? Part of the whole like I suck or I'm not worthy or I'm
Yeah.
this or I'm that, or we make time for everything else.
But not ourselves.
Yeah. So that's
Yeah.
it. I just wanted to say that's like knowing you need the
Yeah.
help and actually allowing yourself to get it and receive it
Yeah.
is like a leap.
Oh, it is. It really
And
is. And yeah, and that second one, it was funny because the same thing, my husband, it was so interesting how, the universe, spirit, God, whatever you want to call it, works. Because my husband, I obviously do a lot of this stuff. My husband's also in the health space. He does not do this type of stuff. I mean, he gets it. He appreciates that I do it, but he doesn't do it for himself. But
there's a lot less dudes in this space. When I go to the trainings, I'm usually like, it's like 20%. 20%.
Like he in his life had people who were also experiencing miscarriage and it was affecting him. And I was like, there's a lesson here for us. And we talked about it a lot and we realized that during that second miscarriage, I said, he tried to reach out and help me. And the way that, he basically just said, hey, what can I do for you? And it was so funny because I didn't remember saying it until we had that conversation. It was, you can't understand this because you didn't go through it. And that was horrible to say. And it dishonored him and his feelings in this situation. But that's like how horrible and low and just that's what was coming out. And in that moment, that put like kind of a wedge in our relationship that was there until we brought it back up last year and dealt with it. And that in and of itself, so we were conscious of it, but then we had to work through it, right? So that was me spending a lot of time. I would get into the bathtub and like tons of salt on me, trying to clear stuff out. And it was funny because he'd be like, "What's wrong?" He's like, "You're in here." He's like, "You're crying again." And I'm like, "Yes." So I would have to get out and then talk about it with him, like all the things that came up. And so it was hard. It was really hard, but the conversations were difficult too, because it brought up all of the things that were a byproduct of that moment, all of the disconnect that we had. And so then we had to, come back together. And I have to say, I mean, it was probably one of the best things that has happened because, we came back together and we're stronger and things are better than ever. But it was like, so much of it was like identifying this stuff and going through the grief and literally going through it. It was like, I felt like for me, I went through like 2 death of selves last year. It totally sucked because it does. And that's something I tell people. And like always doing the trauma work. It's hard. It is hard. And it seems like sometimes in the moment it can be overwhelming and you don't want to do it, but the gifts that you get after the fact are incredible. And I'm like, it makes it all worth it. And the way that your life changes, not just from a health perspective, a physical health perspective, but an emotional perspective. And, your connection. I feel like my connection with the divine is incredible now because I've released all of this like emotional baggage. And like the way that I liken it to the people that I work with, it's like, do you want to work with a blank canvas where you have the creativity to just put whatever you want on there? Or do you want to work with the canvas that is already like splattered with all the colors and muddled and muddy? And like, that's kind of when you have all of this built up inside of yourself, that's what the canvas is. But the more you can do the work and, kind of clear out that canvas, it leaves you open to doing so many more amazing things in your life. It's like, I
and
could
like
not,
being more you, right?
Yes, being more you, but showing up more authentically as yourself and having the confidence to say, this is me, this is my voice, this is who I am. But then also just like in any aspect of your life, like that creativity that like we talk about us being, humans being creators, we are, and the options are limitless, but when you are in the thick of all that, you can't see it. And it wasn't until I went through all of this, and it's been a journey, like I said, like 13 years. I couldn't see it until like probably like the last like 3 or 4 months. But now I'm just like, yeah, I can do this. Like all of the weight and the garbage and everything is gone. Mostly. I know there's still stuff there because there always is stuff there, right? I'm currently in a phase where like things are flowing largely very well. And I also have like kind of like that inner knowing and inner peace that even when things get really, really shitty, I'll make it through it, which I think that is huge.
I think that's a super valuable thing to pick up through those experiences and like remind yourself of when you're in need of hearing it. Because I know when people are in it, like I can speak from experience that it doesn't feel that way. Like your mind can make up a lot of stories that it's not that way, that you can't handle it, that you're not going to get through it, that like it's always going to be like this, that this is, what is now. And I think that perspective is huge. And it's not just like this emotional and mental clearance. There's like a physical, like you just feel different, right? And so those things in the body, you talked about the canvas, I like that analogy, and those scribbles on it and whatever, those can be illnesses, those can be like reactivity and patterns of ways of being where you do something or say something and be like, man, I always do that and I hate that I do that. Well, you do that for a reason. And then it could be tension or pain or anything. Like I have certain, I go to yoga a lot and I have certain areas of my body where I know is like more tight than others or is more constricted. And now I've learned a lot of somatic stuff and I know, and then I'll learn like, oh, that makes a lot of sense then. And because certain areas of the body get constricted. And I just interviewed Dr. Eric Gordon, who's my wife's doctor. He's in the Bay Area, and he's one of those, if somebody lands at Gordon Medical, they've been to 25 doctors, and he sees like Lyme and all these like really complex things. And he wanted to talk about structural imbalances and fascia and like how the fascia and that functional medicine people like overlook this entirely, because if the fascia is constricted and the body's tight and the muscles are tight, or the cervical spine is off, or like there's areas where like nerves are impinged or anything. He goes, how do you think organs and systems in the body are going to work properly if they're not getting the right message from the nerves, or they're not getting this, or they're getting this pain signal of this is out of it? He goes, and most functional medicine people, he goes, I don't know how to fix those things, but I know how to identify them, and then I can help point them towards somebody. But like manual therapy and body work. And then I was like trying to talk myself out of jumping in to that, because that was like I know about that. I can say something that you're not saying. And I was like, I'm going to just do it. And I talked about how like trauma and trapped emotions and these kind of things now are believed to kind of wedge themselves in some way in the fascia. Like that's where they kind of live, and that those constrictions.
100%.
So I started telling him about like the diaphragm and how like the diaphragm's always constricted. And then if the diaphragm's constricted, it's not just for breathing. There's all this other stuff that runs through the diaphragm from the lower body to the upper body. And it massages the intestines, and it massages
the vagus nerve.
You're into cardiology. What's the thing that holds the heart?
The pericardium.
It massages the pericardium. So then like it has to do with your heart rate variability, your digestion, your vagus nerve, all these things. If the diaphragm is tight, and the diaphragm tightens as a stress and trauma response. And I'm rambling, and I'm like, oh man, I shouldn't be rambling on top of this like genius doctor. And then he goes, that's why I like coming on your shows, because I always learn something. And I was like, oh my God.
Yes.
See, but he's like, see that. He goes, most doctors don't know that, so they wouldn't even look for that. And then, so it's and then you can go the hard way, which is the manual therapy. Like that's the hard way to loosen that kind of stuff up. And then there's the softer way.
Yep, exactly.
Which is like looking at how did it get that way in the first place, and doing both together is great.
Yes,
but like,
100%. That's why I'm glad my background, my professional degree is a DC. I'm a chiropractor. And it was funny because, truth being completely transparent, I didn't know what a chiropractor was. I literally went to chiropractic school only to be able to to practice functional medicine, because way back 20 years ago, you had to have a terminal healthcare degree. But in so many ways, it has served me really, really well, because I have been able to identify that. And that was like, I didn't mention that, along with the Hashimoto's, I also I like to say had Lyme, because I don't like to acknowledge that I don't want to say I don't like to acknowledge. I feel like there's like that energetic piece of saying I have Lyme or I have Epstein-Barr virus, like you're identifying with it. And then that puts you into like a very self-limiting box, right? So I had these, they showed up on lab tests for me. So Lyme, Bartonella, Epstein-Barr virus. And, I went through mold twice, and that's
Wow.
exactly what
I
was
didn't know
happening
all
to
of
me.
that. No.
Oh, I thought you knew that. Yeah. So that was kind of all like, that was more in the last, so the first moldy place was 11 years ago. So that kind of also jump started all of this stuff, because I had some symptoms. They would kind of wax and wane. And I never really, so I always thought to myself, I'm like, I'm so functional, I can't have these things. But then perimenopause hit and the hormones started really
Mm.
fluctuating. And then the symptoms started becoming more dramatic. And I'm like, I got to do something about this. But one of the biggest things that I noticed was from the tip of my head all the way down to my sacrum, I was getting tighter and tighter and tighter. My fascia was so tight. I used to be so incredibly flexible, and then it all went away. So that was a clue, number one. And then number two, I went to a healing retreat, and the person who was facilitating it was absolutely amazing. She was an intuitive. She was a medical doctor that turned into an intuitive, or I shouldn't say turned into, she just embraced those gifts. And she was working on somebody else. She was literally working on somebody else. She turns around and points at me, and she's like, "You have a blocked, your diaphragm is blocked. Your chakra is blocked there." And I was like, no, yes, she was totally right, because it was funny when I do energy work, and I had been trying to move energy down through, from top down or bottom up. I would always get stuck there. I could not move my energy beyond there until it was this year when I went through those two kind of, deaths of self that I've called it, because it literally was. Now I can move my energy freely, but I could not through my diaphragm at that moment. And I see that so frequently in my, especially like you said, the people who have Lyme, the people who have the chronic viral illnesses, or even, some of the, I would say, post-COVID related stuff. It's really interesting. It is, you're spot on. And it's all trauma.
Yeah. And wow, I didn't know all that. That's wild. And it's interesting that your diaphragm area freed up when you had all those episodes of emotional expression.
Yeah.
Because one of the things I do is biodynamic breathwork and trauma release, and it has a bodywork component to it. And so we learn a lot of the somatic location, when an area or band, it's based off Wilhelm Reich and Alexander Lowen, bioenergetics. And they were kind of the first therapists to correlate tension areas in the body to certain patterns or emotions or things. And the diaphragm constricts in those models to control emotional expression and sexual urges and energy. They used to be able to talk about that way more freely. Now when you bring that up, everyone's like, oh my God, he's into tantra or some weird shit. But it's not. They used to be part of it, because energy is energy. And so it constricts things going from to from down to up, or from up to down. So it disconnects heart from love from sex, and then it disconnects
that's what it was for me,
emotional expression. And it's doing that because if something's coming that you don't want to happen,
we tighten up.
Tighten up, you hold your breath. And if you were to relax your breathing in that situation and relax your body, the emotions come. And so that's a natural thing, because at a lot of time you couldn't, or you didn't have the capacity to do it, or it wasn't the right place, or you didn't feel safe, or blah, blah, blah. Or you were told, like you mentioned all the way at the beginning, we'll tie this into the beginning, not just our generation, but in a lot of Western culture, especially boys, that's not okay. You can't cry. You can't rub dirt on it. Quit being a baby. Quit being a girl. Girl is used as an insult to boys, which insults both together. And if you say that, stop. Just I'm throwing that out there. I don't usually tell people what to do, but if you say stuff like that, just stop. You're harming your kids.
That bothers me. So, totally.
Especially because women can tolerate so much more pain than men. But anyways, it's so interesting that came up because I was talking to Dr. Gordon, that he said, I see so few functional medicine practitioners who are even aware of these correlations. So I'm looking forward to, as I do more of this work, which I know that you do this too, is kind of educating our colleagues on these things. Not so that everyone becomes a trauma therapist or a manual, whatever, insert somatic therapist or any of this. just to be able to identify it, like to be able to understand that these are things, that this is a thing, and that
Yeah.
it's yes, and it's like equally as important to address this side of healing
Yeah.
as it is what somebody's eating or how they're sleeping or what their supplements are or what lab tests they're running or what medications they're on. Like this is an equal part of the stool leg, right? And so
Oh, I agree. That's, I mean, even before I had these tools, I mean, I've been doing this kind of work in some way, shape, or form, definitely 3 years, probably reaching out to 4 years, as I gained, like you, did more certifications and gained more tools. But even before that, I was still like, I was putting on my treatment plans, like 10, 11, 12 years ago, like read these books, go check out these, just breathwork, sites or tools, like trying to give people tools because I knew that needed to be addressed.
What were your go-to? Like when you, I'm going to say this lovingly to everyone, you included, like when you didn't really know what you were doing, when you first started, like when you first started learning that stuff of it, like who were your, I find people have these in common a lot. Like the go-tos, either the books or the teachers or the websites or the things. Do you remember any of the stuff that you sent people to?
Because I saw so many autoimmune people, I used to tell Keisha's book, Solving the Autoimmune Puzzle. The Body Keeps the Score. I feel like that one's pretty ubiquitous, but it's really, I think it's very helpful. I call it like the gateway. It's like the gateway to like understanding what's going on. And then I think it's 60 Seconds to the Life You Love. It's Joan. Oh, I can't think of her last name right now. I know her because she's
people
like
can
kind of
find it with that.
Yeah. But that one too, because she's one like, and I feel like she's teaching a critical skill, like, feel your emotion, like understand what they are. She outlines the emotions because so many of us, because we've been told don't feel this, don't feel that for so long, they don't understand what they're feeling. And so she names them, right? So she's naming the emotions and then she gives you a quick tool to like name it, feel it, and move through it. And I think that yes, this work is important, but also, and this is something that I do in the work that I do, giving people tools to manage everyday life. And that's what she's doing. So that was another kind of go-to for me too,
That's
was
cool.
I've
run into that a lot with people when I'm going through trainings and stuff, because a lot of the stuff I do, like it's, what are you feeling? And they don't know. And I didn't know, and I still struggle with it sometimes. And we don't even think of that should be such like a basic, I don't like to use the word should, but it could be it is a very fundamental part of the human experience, is to have feelings and emotions, and then to like be completely drawing blanks across the board on like how I feel and what it is and not being able to describe it. It's like a fundamental breakdown in like what we are and how we're raised and what we're taught and everything. This, if you can see behind me, if you can see that tote, so on the inner of the circle is like the core: anger, surprise, happy. So the inner has those. It branches out to like more descriptive, like trusting, peaceful, powerful, and then out and out and out. And this was the tote from the CI conference in Budapest this last year, because therapists, CI practitioners have such a hard time like getting the clients to be able to name the things that we have to have charts to teach us how to call the thing that and they're super useful though. If I look at that, I'm like, oh, I feel that. So
the book,
cool.
The author was Joan Rosenberg.
Joan
it just
Rosenberg.
came to me. It's Joan Rosenberg.
I wrote it down.
It's 60 seconds or 90 seconds to a life you love. And that is, it's like you said, I mean, it's powerful to be able to name those, it's helpful because then you know what you're feeling and it's something that you can address like when that's happening. And it's so important to give people tools. Like a lot of the kids that I work with, we do a lot of color work with them and color therapy. And one thing that I tell them, it's like, if you're at school and you're feeling overwhelmed or stressed out, just tune into yourself for a second, clear it out, tune into your breath, think of a color that you need. What do you need in that moment? You don't even have to name the emotion, and just breathe it in. And it helps. It helps them get through that moment, right? Because it's like, it's that energy frequency that they need. And so it's like, helping them just get through that day. And I'm like, and then, if you need more help later on, we can do work on whatever it is that was. But, I think it's in the kind of emotions, trauma, self-growth space, it is not only doing the work, but also being able to like get through, daily life and the challenges that we meet every day.
How does it impact what skills or tools can I now have that enable me to navigate things in a different way? Yeah, I think we miss that a lot. I think there's a lot of this advice out there, like, oh, just be this way. And
yes.
Or like have these big cathartic releases and then your life's going to be different. And like to an extent it can be, but like you still need to know how to be. So I know we got to go. What if you got one thing to drop, like either a practice or a recommendation? That book is cool, or like something that you like to teach people, or one of your favorite tools, or something that you can share. I'll put you on the spot.
Okay. Yeah. So I am a big proponent of gratitude. I feel like if you're feeling chaotic and all the crap is going on, if you can just sit down, like I said, breath, basic breath work, having your inhale shorter than your exhale, like make sure that, you're maybe inhaling for 3 or 4 seconds, exhaling for a lot longer, start doing that. And then just focus in on your heart, focus in on gratitude. Think of somebody or something you are extraordinarily grateful for. Focus in on that, just feel it in your heart, feel it in your chest, and sit with that for a couple of minutes. And that will just change. It changes there's studies done, it changes your physiology, and it will help you get through that moment. But gratitude has become a central part of like my daily practice of everything that I do. And then once a week, I do a big gratitude session. That's something I'll have to share with you later, because I had a really freaking crazy mind-blowing one the other day that I was just like, what is going on right now? But yeah, like I feel like gratitude is a good place to start. But gratitude and forgiveness is a whole other subject. But when you can harness those two things, it does make it easier to get through a lot in life. Like even like the anxious moments and the sad and depressed moments. Like the other day, I happened to get neurovirus and I was like sick in bed. I was the only one. I kept my family away from it. But what was weird is I'd been feeling really good, and then all of a sudden I get sick, and all of this negative loops going on in my mind. And so I would stop, I would do some gratitude work, but then I would also remember, like, this is short-lived. This is happening because I'm sick right now. I was so sick. I thought my eyeballs were going to pop out of my head because I was like vomiting so forcefully. And then I just, as the day got on, like it less and less. The self-talk went away, all of the stuff, it cleared. But it was like I said, the tools to get us through the moments. And a lot of it was just kind of like gratitude and also saying these thoughts are not mine, because they really weren't. I don't know what kind of negative vortex was getting shunted into me at that moment, but it really wasn't. It wasn't stuff that I normally would say to myself. So I was like literally consciously rejecting those ideas. So yeah, I would start off with gratitude. Gratitude is a big piece of the puzzle, but combining it with that breath work and that intention makes it very powerful.
Great. Thank you. And that'll be useful for everybody out there listening. And if they want to find you and they're interested in your new transition into this kind of work, where's the best place for them to go?
My website is drstephaniedavis.com. So just drstephaniedavis.com.
Perfect. And we'll have the links down below in the show notes and everything else. So thank you so much. I always enjoy chatting with you. I think we could talk for hours about this stuff. Yeah. So maybe sometime we could collaborate on a more elaborate kind of thing. I think that would be fun. So
that'd be awesome.
Hope this year is a little easier than the last one.
Thank you.